Jaan Tallinn was among the creators of Skype. Today, he is a leading figure in the field of existential risk, having co-founded both the Center for the Study of Existential Risks and the Future of Life Institute. He is also an active early-stage investor and one of the first investors in Wisnio, where he is also a member of the advisory board. Jaan Tallinn met the co-founder of Wisnio, Tõnis Arro, to share his thoughts about AI, existential risks, investments, startups, and database decisions.
Thank you very much for taking time to meet us. Jaan Tallinn, you have currently 177 active investments right now.
If you say so, I'm not sure. Something between 150 and 200, it sounds right.
So can you say the reasons why you invest and what are some of the principles you use making your decisions about investment objects?
Two reasons. One is to kind of fund my philanthropy, and I do think that I have some comparative advantage when it comes to investing. So it's kind of a natural source of funds for my philanthropy. And the other thing is because my philanthropy is actually about kind of the negative sides of technology, novel technology, and risks associated with novel technology. I think it kind of helps very much to be on the frontier, so to speak, when it comes to technology and kind of actually know the people who are working on potentially dangerous things, so I could have some kind of influence over the risks.
So one of the first investments, if I'm not wrong, was DeepMind, and that was just because of the topic, the subject they were dealing with. How many of all the rest of later investments are related to AI?
So it's kind of hard to draw a boundary. It's sort of like, AI at the core is basically delegating decisions to machines. So it's like you can kind of, from that perspective, you can just have like an Excel table and some Excel macros that are kind of doing automated decisions. Is that AI? Not really. Or it's kind of like depends on where you draw the boundary of AI. Like one useful boundary to draw that I find is, are we talking about sort of fundamental AI research and that kind of advances the frontier, or are we talking about AI applications that kind of take kind of existing AI libraries and so forth, and then just like train the systems for particular domain? And in the latter category, sort of AI, applied AI, I probably have like dozens and dozens. Whereas in this first category of fundamental AI research, I think I have something like 6 or so. In fact, like just a few minutes ago, I did my latest one in that category, group called Conjecture in London.
Let's talk a little bit of both of the AI research and the applications. So what is the biggest thing that has happened in AI research recently?
In the last 5 years, there has been kind of like big, surprising capability gains in AI, and they kind of can be traced back to a paper by Google Brain in 2017 called "Attention is All You Need," and it's a paper that introduced a technique called transformers that basically made deep learning neural networks much more capable. And based on that invention, various large language models that are being trained are based on transformers, as well as the latest thing just from this year, diffusion models, most famously Stable Diffusion, and the family of AI applications techniques that are being used to generate art and videos, and kind of producing creative products.
You have said that the machines make better decisions, and you are worried about this.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of highlights the ambiguity of the term better. What do we exactly mean by better? And there can be kind of at least 2 interpretations. Like one is kind of more competent in service of a goal without saying anything about the goal. So there is this like famous paper by Nick Bostrom, Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom, called value orthogonality or something. It basically argues that you can have arbitrarily competent behavior in service of arbitrary goals. So like if you have a competent system, that doesn't mean that it's doing the thing that you want. So that's like one meaning of better. It's more competent. The other thing when people say that when they mean better is it something valuable? Is it something that kind of brings well-being or like health or things like that? So in that sense, I think it's important to not kind of confuse those two meanings of the word. Like if you have more competent systems, that doesn't mean they're going to create a better world in terms of like value. Yes, indeed, I'm worried about increasingly competent non-human decision makers that will bring about a world that is not valuable.
You have created 2 research centers, or co-created, to study this existential risks. Are these the main places in the world right now where this kind of research is?
So the centers are the Future of Life Institute in Cambridge, US, and the Center for Study of Existential Risk at the Cambridge University at Cambridge, UK. So both are in Cambridge, but one is in the colder Cambridge and the other one is in the older Cambridge, as they say. So they are prominent members of what I call like AI alignment or like existential risk ecosystem, but they're not like dominant ones. That there are like multiple, I want to say something like a dozen organizations now that have been established, and nor they are the oldest organizations. Like there have been, for example, Machine Intelligence Research Institute already existed when I wasn't even aware that there is such problem as AI alignment, or friendly AI as it was called back then. And Nick Bostrom's Future of Humanity Institute, again, also is something like 20-year-old organization by now.
Do you think there is enough attention to these issues?
Oh no, like absolutely no. The number of people who are working on these topics is increasing like really quickly right now, but still we are if you count like full-time people who are working on existential risks, I want to say something around 200 or so. So like we are as a species, we are in a situation where everyone might die later this decade, or certainly later this century, and we have something like 200 people thinking about this problem.
What about governments? I would think that you as a person who are very well deeply engaged with this issue, that every government wants to talk to and discuss this. Is it so? Or
yeah, there is definitely like more and more interest in these topics, like from various regulatory bodies and straight up governments. Like one big problem is that this is kind of deeply unfamiliar problem for regulation and governments. Like the typical way how regulation works on this planet is that we invent something new, then like we have a bunch of accidents, some things go wrong, and then the regulators step in and start constraining the technology. Whereas like with AI, it's like potentially superhuman AI and potentially kind of existential risk, other existential risking technologies. The problem is that we might just get like one chance to get things right. So it's like traditional regulatory approaches are not going to be like full solution. If you would have the chance to say one thing, what the world governments or United Nations or European Commission or what they should do? I would be kind of very divided between suggesting just this meta level approach, which means promote more research into how can we survive potentially disruptive technological innovations, most important AI. And the other thing that I would be kind of like suggesting, like because I'm very deeply skeptical about the bodies like UN, etc., being able to actually reliably produce research. I would just like say that like start thinking hard about regulating data centers, because like I think they are very concrete things that exist, and something goes wrong, something will go wrong, then it probably will be in some data center. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this? Yeah, so the current AI paradigm is very compute heavy. I mean, I think a year or two ago, the head of NVIDIA, which is kind of leading provider of AI, said that he expects in the next 5 years, I guess now it's like in the next 3 years, first $1 billion training run. So he expects that some organization before the middle of this decade will spend $1 billion on just one training process of one AI. So that kind of illustrates there's the situation where capabilities seem to be, in some sense, kind of purchasable by just shoving more electrons into AI hardware and data centers. And yeah, those the AI hardware is, because of so massive scale, they are hosted in data centers. And the big problem is that these data centers are not really meant for things like that. So they are running insecure operating systems, and the hardware, underlying hardware, CPUs, they are insecure, certainly insecure against something that could be potentially superhuman.
So to regulate them more, what would you do?
I mean, the big disclaimer is that I don't have like final answers. I think that's why I'm kind of torn between this meta suggestion that we need more research. So like anything that I can think of right now is just half-baked. But I can imagine things that automated shutdown or throttling of data centers. For example, you can imagine, like in biology, in synthetic biology, people have this approach where they are working with potentially dangerous synthetic organisms, that they make them dependent on some kind of drip of a certain chemical that does not occur in nature. So like if the organism escapes, the organism will naturally die out because it's deprived of this drip. So we can have like an equivalent in data centers. So if there's like some kind of drip of cryptographic tokens that keep the systems running, if that drip stops, the systems would naturally kind of like either shut down or like slow to some like slow sort of hibernation speed. That's an example of something that I believe would make things at least marginally safer.
Okay, can we switch to now to some more earthly things, concrete things like as you have had so many investments and some of them have been more successful than others. Mm-hmm. Can you think of something which differentiates between successful startups or early stage companies from others?
I don't think there are like kind of like silver bullets, but I try to invest in companies that kind of combine what I call enablers. So the question to ask is like, why wasn't this done like 5 years ago or 10 years ago? What has happened? Because if you think about it, like the reason why startups can compete with incumbents in the first place is that the incumbents, their sort of technological base, their architecture, their solutions were developed for a technological environment that was there like 5, 10, or like 20 years ago. So like there have been changes. So for example, Skype was developed for computers that were either plugged to the wall or they were laptops. And so like battery wasn't that big of a problem. Whereas with mobile phones, like battery is like pretty much everything. This is like super important to conserve battery. So I think I had already left Skype when Microsoft took over, but I think that was one big challenge that Microsoft must have had with Skype. So like, what are the enablers? What has happened in the last 5 years that makes your business competitive? And the other is basically a team. Like, so if the first question is like, why now? The second question is, why you? Like, do you bring something on the table that like other people don't have? Or like, do you have like some kind of particular experience in this domain? Or have you had some adjacent efforts that are either successful, have given you some comparative advantage? I think these two principles are at least somewhat predictive. And I think the third one is just how smart the people are. Smartness, I mean, it's kind of controversial in these woke days, but I think it still works.
What are the main reasons for failure?
I think the main reason for failure, sort of abstract reason, is what Paul Graham says. Like the practical reason is money runs out. That's the most common reason. Of course, that doesn't say much. Although, like I've seen companies where the money doesn't run out, but the team gets tired. So like it's not enough to just have monetary runway. You need to keep up the spirit, the morale of the company, the team. So that's sort of like a non-answer that money runs out. A more interesting answer is what Paul Graham says in his essay, like was it like essay? But anyway, he's famous for saying that like ultimately you have to make something that people want. So like the kind of more interesting reason is that startups fail that are making things that they think people want, but people actually don't want. And quite often it takes them like too long to realize that. So that's another very common reason.
So at least one of the reasons is team failure, or team gets tired of what they've been doing or of each other. Or
I mean, it goes back to this, like if you're not making something that people want, if you're making something that people want, like it's just super easy to keep up morale. I mean, in Skype, I've been saying that like Skype, the company, made like all the mistakes in the book. Yeah. It was like, it was very well run. I mean, different times had like different kind of management quality, but like it didn't matter because like Skype had like so intense product market fit that like the mistakes were just papered over and everybody continued to be happy.
But there are other examples when there is so great and smart team and they realize that they will be doing wrong thing and make a total pivot and start doing something else and still do it. So.
Yeah. So like I think pivots are, yeah, absolutely. Like there are many examples of pivoted teams that are successful. Although like more often you have like people who are pivoting and then just still failing. Yeah, because like if your kind of first guess was wrong, what people want, that is actual evidence that your second guess will also be wrong. But it's like, yeah, for what it's worth.
I think that the most important decisions that any manager or executive or founder has to make are the hiring decisions, the things whom you bring into a team. And I also believe that these are the worst decisions if you take all management decisions, then the hiring decisions are the worst ones because they are made based on either without or on wrong data. And what we are doing, we're trying to bring data into this hiring process, and we have built a system or the process based on Daniel Kahneman's research on hiring. You have been kind of fan of Daniel Kahneman as well. So what is your favorite takeaway from his big amount of different things he has written about?
One of my biggest claims to fame is that I've actually visited Daniel Kahneman and had like dinner with him. Yeah, I'm a big fan of him. So my own big takeaway, I think it's this entire kind of like system 1, system 2 separation. I think has been like super useful in kind of trying to understand what actually happens kind of in social situations. There is this great book by Robin Hanson and Kevin Simler called Elephant in the Brain that kind of takes that concept and runs with it and has points like the system 2, that is the conscious part of the mind, often just being like a press secretary for the system 1, while actually being completely in the dark about like what are the reasons why the boss, i.e. the system 1, is doing things, and then just like kind of like thinking about like inventing virtuous, plausible sounding reasons why you, the person, is doing things, while actually being oblivious what the actual reasons were. So I think that's a very useful and practical paradigm, basically.
Yeah. Well, but we can say that what we are doing is also putting people to use system 2 to make hiring decisions. Usually they make it by system 1, and there is lots of management folklore, including this famous hire fast, fire fast. Like if you have a fast decision, you use system 1 by definition.
Yeah, I mean, but when it comes to firing, I do think that possibly because of system 1 reasons, like firing is much harder to do than hiring. So like in general, you are, as a like startup manager or CEO, you are on average you're erring on the side of like not firing fast enough. But like of course there is a very real trade-off. Like if you are not firing fast enough, you are creating like you're kind of diluting your culture of like work ethic basically, because people see that like people aren't as good. Your colleagues are average quality of your colleagues goes down if they're not fired fast enough. If you're firing like too fast, then you have the other problem, which is like you're creating like a environment of fear, right? Like people, like instability. So you need to like find like a middle ground. Firing is ultimately sort of addressing the errors that you made during hiring.
Yeah, I agree that firing is usually done too slowly. So I have never seen an occasion, what the typical occasion a manager says, let's give him some more time. And when you already have this thought and you give another month or two, it never happens that something will get to the better. So
yeah, that also reflects my...
If you go back, when you first had this decision, probably it's the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Then it was the time to make the decision.
Yeah, right? I think that's an illustration where your system 2 is kind of like inventing a reason why to like avoid this system 1. Inventing the reason to explain your inaction, whereas like your actual reason is that your system 1 is just so uncomfortable.
Yeah, because you have to say that, well, I made the mistake. I employed him. I guided him.
Yeah, that's another reason. Yeah.
And that's the reason why, like we have the data that 50% of the hiring decisions goes badly, in this sense that after a year, the men who made the decision, or men and women, they wouldn't say that, well, I'm sure it was the right decision. I would make it again. But they don't fire the guy because they would need to say that it was me who made the mistake.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
So what we are doing, we are trying to actually get the bias out of the hiring process, because people make decisions and people are biased initially. So all the hiring decisions are biased, especially if not systematically tried to bring data in. So that's what we're doing. It's interesting. You mentioned like decision bias as one of the short-term existential threats recently on one of your. Do you remember this mention? Or?
No, like usually like bias in AI is like a kind of classical kind of short-term worry of people who are kind of dealing with like sort of like the ethics side of AIs. My own focus is on AIs that are potentially kind of superhuman and could be just like very hard to control. Like, of course, you can kind of like squint a little and say that like if I worry about AIs that are very competent and working with a goal that is not valuable or even dangerous to humanity, you can kind of present it as a bias, but it's like the usual ways it's presented is that it is sort of incorrect generalization. So it's like if the classical example is the kind of the paperclip maximizer problem by Nick Bostrom. Like you're going to train an AI to help with your paperclip production in your paperclip factory. But once the AI gets sufficiently competent, it will just go in the universe and turn the entire universe into paperclips and then kind of consume itself to turn itself into paperclips. That is a generalization of the goal that you gave. Another example might be like hedge fund creating an AI to maximize the number in the bank account. The generalization of that thing is take all the matter in the universe, turn it into a computer that can store a really big number, and that's your bank account. Then you maximize that bank account. So like I would say like I'm more worried about kind of like incorrect generalizations of kind of human goals.
I think in hiring context where the bias comes in is when some applications try to take human side out of the decision making totally, like making like let's make the robot makes the interview instead of humans, so he's not biased, but then it appears that there are other biases involved. So
one thing definitely that AI, that the sort of the current crop of AIs, although like you don't even need AI, you can just use statistics for that. One way of describing AI is advanced statistics. Is kind of, they expose the biases very well. So like, I mean, there are kind of famous experiments of judges like rendering one type of decisions before lunch and after lunch. Although like all psychological research is suspect, I would say, but it's plausible, I think.
A few years ago when we discussed AI issues, you mentioned the book Avocado Corpse as
Core.
Is still the favorite one, or is there some other one better?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the book is my favorite one, but it's my favorite one when it comes to illustrating a very plausible AI disaster. So it's a book that totally has like disaster in it, But every step to that disaster, I go, yep, that could totally happen. That could totally happen. In fact, like earlier today, I had a call with a company that's like, can we do something like that? I was like, have you read our Cutter Corp?
What else are you reading?
My favorite science fiction is the so-called Expanse series by James Corey, which is like the artist name for like a couple of writers. Yeah, it's just like super well written book about space. It's a space opera. Okay. Another one that I really liked was the Hail Mary project by the same guy who wrote The Martian. So it's a hard science fiction, but it's basically a Martian on steroids because like the premise is much more stranger.
Okay, I think I have asked my main questions, what I prepared. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.